I explode like C4. And I'm cold to the core. I swear I can't remember what my life was like before. I got the music in me, knew it simply had to be my destiny. I'm blessed to be the best within my C-N-H-E-N-D. Please believe not Ninja Gaiden. I'm not the guy to fight with them lightning. They come in dumb and I leave them enlightened.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Julie from SBMTG on the YouTube.com. Down there, we like magic, you know by now. And at this point, the Pro Tour is done and over with. It's in the books. I've already showed you all of those decks. Check out that video if you haven't checked it out yet. You've seen the expensive stuff the pros are playing. So with that in mind, let's get back to budget. Let's get down to business and talk some inexpensive decks that you can win your F&M with. Starting with Monogreen Stompy. I know a lot of you are excited about this one. But before I get too far into it, let me just remind you this video is brought to you by TCGplayer.com, where they got cool cards for your cat or your mom. That's where cats and moms buy magic cards, Julie. But anyway, this deck is super cheap. It's only about 50 bucks on TCG Player. So if you're interested in this list, just click the first link in the description. Take you right over to the site where you can check it out. But let's look at this deck. Well, for the uninitiated or maybe new players, the four of you who haven't heard of Stompy, it's essentially a mono green aggro deck. Really low to the ground, curves out its creatures, and obviously since it's green, it plays mostly creatures, because green isn't necessarily known for its removal or it's like really good spells. Usually these decks play a few pump spells. Ours is no exception. So as far as the tools that Monogreen Stompy usually uses, we've got all of them in the format. We've got really good on-curve creatures, some that are much higher than their usual spot on the curve, and we've got some really good pump spells. As a matter of fact, so we have creatures that are pump spells, we have lands that are pump spells, so we've got a lot going for our Monogreen Stompy deck in the format right now. Let's check it out. Let's start with the one drops and just work our way up from there. We're going to play 4 copies of Kessig Prowler in the deck. This is a definite yes inclusion. This is basically our copy of Falcon Wrathgorger. You know, we want a 1-mana, 2-power guy, and it doesn't even have to really do much outside of that, but as a matter of fact, Kessig Prowler does, in a way. It's kind of better than Falcon Wrathgorger, you know. Nothing in the deck, in the main deck at least, costs 5 mana. So this is sort of also our 5-drop. We can get it to turn 5. It can become a much bigger creature, which is pretty nice, you know. If they don't block it and kill it in combat in the early turns, then it really threatens to become one of the biggest creatures on the battlefield for us. So Kessig Prowler is good whether you're playing it in the early game, or maybe you top deck it and you go ahead and make it a big creature late. Kessig Prowler is nice. I'm also going to play 4 Scythe Leopard in the deck. It's a kitty, Julie. Julie, it's a kitty. But anyway, this is just another 1-mana, 2-power thing. You know, anytime we drop a land, we've essentially invested 1 mana into a 2-power creature, which is what we're looking for here. And it kind of sucks that it's always just a 1/1 on our opponent's turn in this deck, but, you know, we can still trade with Falcon Wrathgorger and Bomat Courier and Earthshaker Kenra and a bunch of other stuff in mono red, so at least you got that going for you. It's never going to just sit there and be dead. When you can block against mono red, it can block and kill a lot of guys. To finish off the 1-drops here, we're going to play 2 copies of Greenbelt Rampager, and I know that's a lot of 1-drops, but I want to get on board really early in this format right now, and Greenbelt Rampager is never actually going to hit the board and stay there on turn 1, you know, and I don't think that it's worth playing a whole 4 of Elephant in this deck. The Pachyderm is a little bit slow for what we're trying to do here. You know, we can't necessarily afford to go like turn 1 Elephant, bring it back to our hand, turn 2 Elephant, Kessig Prowler, bring it back to our hand, turn 3 Elephant, 2-drop, stick it. You know, it just doesn't, even that is a little slow, even when we're on the play. You know, we want to get on board much faster than that. But Elephant, when top decked, can come down and stick pretty easily on turn, you know, 3, 4, and all the way up from there, you know. And it also provides energy for the other energy-related things that we're trying to do in the deck. And there's not a whole lot. We're only playing like 13 cards that care about energy, so it's not like we die to Solemnity or anything. But it is nice to have Rampager around so that we can get the, you know, those other cards a little bit of energy when we need to. Into the 2-drops, here's something that works well with Greenbelt Rampager. We're going to play 4 copies of Long Tusk Cub, just a perennial aggro favorite. You know, aggro decks that play green in them tend to play Long Tusk Cub because this can really easily get to a 3/3. And a 2-mana 3/3 is a very good investment, and it can even go higher than that. Games where you get this to 4/4 or even 5/5 occasionally, you've only invested a couple of mana into a creature that ends up being really, really big. And we need all the creatures that we can that grow. You know what I mean? We don't just want to play like, oh, this turn 2, 2/2, he's going to be a 2/2 forever. We don't want that. You know, at least Long Tusk has the potential to get to 4/4 or 5/5. But here's the best of our 2-drops. We're going to play 4 copies of Resilient Kenra in this deck. I know that his big brother Earthshaker is really getting all the credit right now. Lots of attention for Earthshaker Kenra. And Resilient Kenra is not quite the amazing aggro creature that Earthshaker is, but he's pretty darn good. This is basically a pump spell when you play it. We've got a lot of 1-drops, so we can very easily attack for 4 on turn 2, and of course we can use him after turn 2 as well. You know, if we top deck him on turn 3 and up, he's a really good pump spell, and we can bring him back for a larger than life essentially, and the 4/4 at the same time for 6 mana. Really, really, really good value on this guy. It's always feels fantastic to go Kessig Prowler into a turn 2 Resilient Kendra. You know, attack for 4, and now you got 2 guys on the board. It's a really good way to start the game. Also going to play 4 copies of Rhonas' Last Stand in this deck, and you probably want to know about this. A lot of people were excited when this card first came out. Is it good or not? Well, it was good enough to warrant a playset in this deck, you know, and in some ways, the deck is built around this card a little bit, you know. The reason we're playing a bunch of 1-drops, or at least one of the reasons that we're playing a bunch of 1-drops, is so we can play this on turn 2 and still get a play on turn 3. That's important. We can also play this on turn 3 and leave that mana up for Blossoming Defense, because your opponent is almost always going to want to kill this if they have the ability to do so. But that's if, you know, right now, I'm not really scared of that much aside from Fatal Push killing this thing in the early game, you know. A lot of people have switched out Harness Lightning for a Braid, and a Braid cannot touch this. Neither can all the shocks or Magma Strays that you see going around. So this thing is actually kind of tough to kill, and if you play it on turn 2 or 3, you will steal the initiative from any aggro deck at that point. They got to start worrying, you know. So even though Fatal Push does see a fair amount of play in like Mono Black Zombies and stuff, that's one of the only things we really have to worry about killing this early game. Play this turn 2 or 3, you've got the biggest creature on the battlefield. One last note on Rhonas' Last Stand, by the way, is that not only are we playing so many 1-drops in effect, so that we can play a Rhonas' Last Stand on turn 2 and still have a play on turn 3, we're also playing a bunch of 2-drops, so that on turn 3 we can play a Rhonas' Last Stand, leave a mana up for Blossoming Defense sometimes. If we don't spend that mana, then on turn 4, even though we're tapped down, we're essentially paying Echo for Rhonas' Last Stand. We can still drop a land and play a 2-drop. That's really important. And last 2-drop, I promise, I know we're playing a bunch of 2-drops in this deck, but 15 to be exact, that's a lot, but we need a bunch of 1 and 2-drops for the reason I just stated, like 10 seconds ago, rewind the video. But we need a bunch of really low to the ground creatures, so that if we do play Rhonas' Last Stand, then we still have mana to play creatures on turn 3 or 4. So, with that in mind, we're going to play one more 2-drop, a 3 of Rhonas' Stalwart. This card is actually very good. Stalwart started off as a 2 of, ended up being a 3 of. Now, I think that some copies of this could end up going into the sideboard specifically against mono red aggro, because the card is so good against that deck, as a matter of fact. Now, they can kill it with Shock, Magma Spray, a Braid, whatever. It is killable, but in that situation, they have just spent a removal spell on arguably your, like, least impactful creature. And if they don't kill it, you can very easily get 6 damage through with this over the course of a game by just like running through with it and exerting it, you know, because most of their creatures will not be able to block it in that deck. Like On-Crop Crasher can block it, and there's really not much else. All I'm saying, end of the day here, is do not underestimate Stalwart, man. It's basically a 2-mana, 3-power thing that we can just run in against a bunch of the aggro decks in the format, and they can't touch it. So a free 6 to sometimes even 9 damage over the course of a game can be pretty important. It can put things away for it if they can't deal with it. And usually they're trying to deal with way more important stuff than this. Into the 3-drops here. This is where the curve drops drastically. You know, we've got 15 2-drops. We've only got 4 3-drops. So keep that in mind. But we are going to play 2 copies of Rishkar Pima Renegade, which does literally everything that we want. Like, along with Resilient Kenra and Rishkar and Blossoming Defense and Hash Up Oasis and the next card I show you, we've just got so much pump in this deck, you know? Like, the only actual pump spell is Blossoming Defense. Everything else, it's kind of like we don't have to waste spots in our deck on more pump spells because we've got creatures that provide pump. We've got lands that provide pump. Just like, it's kind of crazy how much in this deck can actually pump our creatures up. Just wanted to point that out. This is yet another pump spell on a stick. And it works kind of well with Rhonas' Last Stand because we essentially now can create creatures that can tap for mana. So we don't have to worry as much about having our mana tapped down after we play a Last Stand. 2 copies of Rhonas the Indomitable because we got to play him. It's Stompy. You know, at least a couple of copies of this guy. He is the most expensive card in the deck, but there's a reason for that. He's probably hands down the best card too. One thing I don't like, I should point this out, is the sort of non-bow lack of interaction that really should be there between Rhonas' Last Stand and this. You know, you go Last Stand, and then you can't go turn 3 Rhonas. That kind of That's dumb. That would be really, really powerful. But I will say that Last Stand does enable Rhonas to swing without having to pump anything, so that's kind of cool. But pretty much every creature in our deck can be pumped by Rhonas and then allow Rhonas to swing, all the way down to like Kessig Prowler and Scythe Leopard if you dropped a land that turn. So almost everything in our deck can enable Rhonas to swing if only one pump. And by the way, I was just talking about how like hard to kill Last Stand is, the 5/4 token. Well, this right here is even tougher to kill, obviously. Can't be killed by Grasp of Darkness like Last Stand's token can, or like Hazaret can, you know. Can't be killed by Grasp, that's kind of important. Can't ever be Fatal Pushed or Abraded or really anything besides like Cast Out and a couple of other cards in this format. So insanely hard to kill, just big mana sink that sits on the board, pumps your guys, and then swings in for 5 indestructible. Just everything about it is really good. And last creature in the deck, I'm going to play 3 copies of Bristling Hydra because it's one of the best creatures in the format. But seriously, this also can't be killed by lots of stuff. Notice that's a theme in this deck, you know. Rhonas' Last Stand does have a couple of things that can kill it, but the majority of red removal that everyone's playing can't kill it. There's not a whole lot that kills Rhonas himself, and now we're on this, and it's obviously very hard to kill a Bristling Hydra. Sure, a Braid's being played, but all you gotta do is give it hexproof one time, and it's then above a Braid. Or you can just give it hexproof in response to a Braid. The Braid will fizzle. That's the way to do it. But you know what I'm trying to say here. The toughness gets out of hand kind of quickly, you know, after just a couple of pumps. There's not much besides an Hour of Devastation that's going to kill this thing. Not only that, but like it's good against most decks. Like on the play, if we can get a turn 4 Bristling Hydra, then we are probably still alive, first of all. And we've just played something else that goes way above all the power toughness of Red's creatures. We're playing this against Control and we can resolve it. We're going to give him fits because it's going to be nearly impossible to remove this thing. So, really good card against a vast majority of the field right now. It's actually one of the best things that Temur has going for it, in my opinion. So we will definitely play it in this deck. It's probably the best 4-drop creature in Standard, you know. As far as Planeswalkers go, we got Gideon and Chandra and stuff. But as far as creatures, I can't really think of too many more 4-drop creatures, maybe Kalidas, that even touch this. Well, let's talk about some of these spells here, because this is a Magic deck. We're going to play 4 copies of Blossoming Defense, but you already knew that. You know, this is just a 1-mana pump spell. It's almost a Giant Growth, but instead of getting that third +1/+1, you essentially get Hexproof, which is miles better because it makes the card a counter spell against all of the removal in the format. I've talked about it all already in this video. Fatal Push, Abrade, Harness Lightning, Grasp of Darkness, even down to like Anguished Unmaking and stuff that doesn't see a whole lot of play. Cast Out. You can just boom. You know, in response, Blossoming Defense your guy, that makes their removal spell fizzle, and suddenly you've got a bigger dude, which can be great. This can get your guy through for extra damage sometimes, or it can like make a dude, you know, survive in combat where he normally wouldn't against a bigger creature. So just all kinds of uses for Blossoming Defense, and it's only the 1 mana. This is one of the other best cards in the deck. There seem to be a lot of those, doesn't it? Monogreen's got a lot going for it. And finally, we're going to play 4 copies of Attune with Ether in the deck just to sort of drive down the amount of basic lands that we have to play and provide energy for like Bristling Hydra, Long Tusk Cub, or even Greenbelt. You know, we can always go like first turn Attune, second turn Greenbelt and a Kessig Prowler, or like leave a mana up for Blossoming Defense, whatever. So it's important to have Attune with Ether. I would much rather play Attune than 3 or 4 more lands. So we'll do that. We're going to play 20 lands in this deck, and if you take nothing else away from this mana base, just know that Hashep Oasis is a very, very real card. And there's not really much else to take away from it, other than, you know, you should play Scavenger Grounds. But aside from that, just Hashep Oasis is an incredible card. It's not Ramunap Ruins or anything, but it's kind of similar in that it's a land that you'll play turn 2, 3, or 4. It'll sit on the battlefield for a couple of turns, and then when you start running out of cards in your hand, it essentially acts like a pump spell that's sitting in your hand. And yeah, it costs a little bit more than you'd usually want a pump spell to cost, but it's been making mana for you all game. Good trade, especially when you're down to top deck mode. Well, you've still got a Giant Growth, essentially. So that's always awesome. The ability to make like a 5-power guy now suddenly an 8-power dude, or even something like Kessig Prowler 5-power. Really, really important. Hashep Oasis is a very good card. Here's our sideboard right here, and a lot of it's fairly self-explanatory. You know, Deliverance is in there against artifacts. There's a lot of those running around. We've got Duskwatch Recruiter in there. The old boy makes a return. That's against most of the control matchup, but sometimes the mid-range matchup too. Winning the card advantage race is really important. Life Goes On is in there against the red matchup, and it could be Nature's Way instead. You could try Nature's Way instead of Life Goes On, but I think Life Goes On is just slightly better. It buys you 2 or even 3 turns sometimes against the mono red aggro deck, and that's all you need to go over the top a lot of the time. So try that out. Lifecrafter's Bestiary's in there also against the control matchup. Just another way to win the card advantage race. Bestiary's awesome for that. And then Ridgescale Tusker is in there sort of as our Verdurous Gearhulk. You know, if you've got the dough, play Verdurous, I would say. But Ridgescale Tusker is sometimes just as good or even better depending on your board state. Something else, by the way, before I leave the sideboard here is that if you do have some extra dollars, you can also play Nissa Voice of Zendikar in this sideboard, at least until rotation, which is still a couple of months away. We've still got like 8 F&Ms before rotation, so that's plenty of time. Nissa Voice of Zendikar would go pretty good in here against the mid-range matchup, and even the control matchup, I would say. Now, before I move on to the power rankings, I just want to point out a couple of cards that I did not play, but started off playing, but ended up getting cut. Let me talk about that real quick. They're both Aftermath cards, you know. One is Appeal to Authority. Let me talk about that real quick. The original plan was to use Ether Hub in the mana base and even Servant of the Conduit in the creature base so that we could play Authority when we needed to. I think Appeal, though, is almost good enough to play in the main deck even if we never play Authority. So it almost made the cut, especially in a deck with 30-plus creatures. I think Appeal is probably worth a look, but I just thought there were better ways to utilize those slots. Another Aftermath card I was looking at was Driven to Despair, and I was going to play it in much the same way, and I was going to play it out of the sideboard, you know. Again, we're going to play Servant of the Conduit, we're going to play Ether Hub, so they were black sources, you know. But still, I thought Driven was kind of fine by itself. Refills our hand, gives all our guys trample for a turn, that's nice, and the Despair half is super dumb against control, if we can make it work. The Menace on Despair is really nice, by the way, but again, I would just rather have solid creatures and solid pump spells than this thing which does neither of those. It relies on you having solid creatures already on the board. The card's just not very good if you're not already ahead, and that's not what sideboards are for. And finally, by the way, before we go to the power rankings, I should also bring up Larger Than Life, which a lot of people are going to want to play in this deck. I just felt like, again, it's kind of like Appeal. You know, I didn't mention this with Appeal, but we've already got Blossoming Defense, we've got Resilient Kenra, we've got Rhonas, we've got Rishkar, we've got Hash Up Oasis, just so many ways to pump creatures already exist in this deck that I didn't feel like we should waste slots on essentially a pump spell that is neither a creature or a land, you know, and isn't a counter spell. Like Blossoming Defense is a counter spell, so we got to play that. But in the end, I just didn't think it was worth it to play a sorcery speed a little too slow. Like 2 mana is a lot for a pump spell, you know. I just didn't think it was quite worth playing, ultimately. Here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 61, and we're good in a lot of categories. Like 7 looks fairly high in power for a deck that's only $50, but again, look at all the cards in the deck. You know, we're playing Rhonas and Bristling Hydra. We're playing a bunch of power uncommons. There's like 17 rares in the deck. And like a bunch of power uncommons like Blossoming Defense and stuff, you know. We're playing a power common in a tune with the Ethers. So I think that 7 is the right number as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, even though we're high in a lot of good stats here, we are very low in versatility. We have got one game plan, play creatures on curve. There's really not much more to it than that. And obviously, we're mono green. We don't play a whole lot of defense either. So those numbers are low, but pretty much every number is at least respectable. Try this deck out. It does exactly what a Stompy deck is supposed to do. I think that Stompy has all the proper pieces to be a real deck right now, and it might just be a little under the radar. We can beat some of the better decks in this format. We go really fast and underneath a lot of control decks, and as far as mono red goes, we can just trade with their guys in the early game, and eventually, turn 4 or 5, our guys get much, much bigger than theirs. So try this deck out. Let me know how you felt about it. But what are we doing next time? That's also super important. I don't know if you guys can see this, but Julie has just been straight like licking my arm for the last 30 seconds. I'm not stopping her or anything. I'm just gonna see how long she does it because she's a weird cat. You're a weird cat, Julie, but I love you. But anyway, what are we doing next time? It's gonna be an aggro deck and it's gonna be a budget deck. So which budget aggro deck? Pray tell. Well, we're either going to do white-black aggro. That's a fun deck, and I actually think you can tune a white-black aggro deck specifically to beat mono-red right now, and you can do it for cheap. Or, something somebody asked for in the comments section the other day, and I think it's a neat deck, I can show you mono-blue aggro, which will be very, very budget. So, which one of those decks do you want to see? White-black aggro, we'll keep it relatively budget, probably around the same budget as this deck. Or, I can show you like a $20 or $25 mono blue deck that's also aggro. You don't see that every day, so which one? But for now, what you need to do is click the like button. Actually, no, you don't need to. I don't need to tell you what you need to do. I'm not your boss. What I'd like you to do, if you enjoyed the video, is hit the thumbs up button. That would mean a lot to me, just because feelsies. Bye, Julie. See, she licked my arm for like a minute and a half there, and then she just left. Cats are weird. But anyway, you can also sub if you're new. Hit the notification bell to make sure that you get all of the said notifications. Do all that. You can also follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. Or if you really want to help the channel out even more, you can click on that deck list in the description. Go over to TCG Player, because believe it or not, just clicking on it helps me too. So do all that stuff, and I will see you cats later. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.
Here's another good tip of how to be a creative whiz kid. Go and collect some leaves and sticks and arrange them into your favorite color.
Blue.
Red. Green. Green is not a creative color.